Good morning. Our eighth class today, and the hope is that we have enjoyed each other's company for one thing, and that in addition we have come away with something that we didn't have when we started, either an assurance, a confirmation, a new thought, a new idea, a new thing to do. I like to feel that something happened during this event, and maybe it's still to happen. We are faced with a decision that we're laying down mortality or we're not. It doesn't lay itself down. And of course, that's a decision that has not been faced by most of the world. So you'd be vindicated if you didn't feel you wanted to come to grips with it right away. But you'd also be chastised for the fact that ultimately you know you've got to come to grips with it. And the best time to do it, of course, is as soon as you know about it. Mortality is going to continue with us whether we say we're going to drop it or not. It has a way of creeping up, showing its colors, and when we think we have covered it, there it is again. We don't know how much ambition is lying within us. And it isn't necessarily to be successful. And ambition is something that is an expression of the individual self. And when the ambition is there, whether we know it or not, then the self is there. And when the self is there, we are in division, because that self is not the self of the Father. Now I know there's a next day coming up when we hope to accomplish this, and another day when we hope to accomplish that. But the true student of spirit is not thinking quite that way. He is thinking, if I'm going to do something tomorrow or something the next day, it better be something that Spirit had in mind. And I better be sent in that direction by the Spirit. If necessary, the Spirit will pull that to me too. In other words, I'm relying on my Spirit to run its own life where this person stands. And now there's less and less person standing here because I have more and more conscious awareness of the presence of my Spirit. And I have more knowledge of the way my Spirit functions, that it knows infinitely more than this person. And if I haven't yet been baptized by the Spirit, I'm looking forward to it. Finally, you can recognize the change when it occurs in yourself and in others. There's something that subdues them. They want to go out and conquer the world, but not the same way others do. They want to conquer the world. They want it to be something that they have overcome. They want to conquer the belief in the world. They want to know that everything is illusion in the world. Everything. And their ambitions for this and that and the other thing was an ambition for something that is not there. They have come to another spa in the desert, which looked as if it were real. All of those entrancing things we saw in the world that we hoped to grab as we went by, we have probably learned the lesson that they're not quite as entrancing as they had appeared to be. Somehow, when we get to outlive our ambitions, it's a joyous feeling of freedom. Whereas at one time you were going to conquer everything you wanted to. It was out there and you were going to topple it. There's nothing to topple. Every illusion stands out as an illusion. Even being President of the United States is an illusion. And we learn in time that the reality of life is a withinness. The whole picture just turns around. And now what I feel inside, what comes forth from inside, is a complete new direction. And you feel different. You feel right. You feel good. You feel that somehow I'm on the Lord's side at last. And then you realize that the Lord has told you that He is inside you. He is your being. You can't think of the other Lord, the Lord of this world. The Lord is your being. We'll call Him Christ. If you've got your terminologies correct, and your attitudes correct, and your awareness correct, this inside is taking over your world. You're learning that the imperceptible is happening. Somehow, you don't realize where you have laid yourself. Sometimes it's rather difficult to find the person that was there once. There's somebody new. And maybe you're not incorporeal in that person, but it feels somewhat like there might be an invisible person running your life. In fact, you are quite sure that an invisible self is running your life. But it never occurs to you at first that the invisible self is you. You would never notice that you would become an invisible being. You are there now, and yet there's no you there. There looks like a person. You see that person. You even say, I think that's me. But you know, I'm not running that life anymore. So there must be someone else running it. And you think deeply. And it's hard to find who's running your life because it's an invisible force, an invisible intelligence. And that invisible person is taking over in the subtlest way. Is it possibly a divine activity? It must be. It must be so subtle that it crept up upon me and it took over while I was just being a human being and not noticing it all. And then I find that the human being is practically nothing. Perhaps the Spirit is now running my life. That would be a wonderful thing, because I didn't direct it. I didn't tell it to do it. It knew just what to do, when to do it. And I don't know how long that's been taking place. But I do know that if it's been taking place and doing such a fine job, I'd better let it do it. Let it continue. The chances are I'm still in its way. And so you go on living and finding out that my world is turned inside out. And as I think about it, what are my perspectives? What are my goals? What have I set for myself as something that must be attained in the next year, and the next year, and the year after that? Oh, I think of a few human things, but they suddenly seem relatively unimportant. They just don't have the pulling power or the pushing power that they had. Now you're beginning to sense that something has happened to you. Maybe it's taken 10 years or 15 or 5. You have changed. And you like it. You realize now that while you've been talking the Bible, studying the Bible, discussing the Bible has been doing something to you. It appears that it has been building a consciousness of the invisible, a consciousness of the incorporeal. And that consciousness, if you were able to isolate it, you would say that consciousness is running this particular form, and no one is in that form. But the consciousness is maintaining an appearance which is called form, while the consciousness is maintaining another identity. I can see the division now, and hopefully the form will decrease and the other identity will increase. That's literally the truth of what happens to all of us. We don't suspect it. We think we're talking. We're out there. We're muscling this, we're muscling that. We're not doing it. Something else is doing what we had thought we were doing, and it becomes apparent to us. One moment, we suddenly become aware that, wait, something is running my life and I didn't know it. Something is going to make my decisions tomorrow, not me. And this me becomes a very small little fellow. Now, what's going to make your decisions tomorrow? What is going to make your decisions tomorrow and the next day and 50 years from now is something that has already made those decisions. They look like new decisions to you, but they've already been made. They have made it all the way to infinity. But you, in the human sense, will become aware of them by degrees. And you'll say, I've decided this, I've decided that. But I, in the midst of you, has already made all the decisions. You are enacting them, or seem to be. when you are convinced that this is what is taking place, and has been taking place for a little longer than you realized, then you're ready to sit back and say, if I could have done all this without conscious effort, without consciously taking thought, I have the ability then to release myself to this force, which I didn't realize was as powerful as it is. And suddenly you decide that maybe you've gone deeper into truth than you realize. I hope this is striking a chord with you, because you'll find it's very true of those who have made penetration into spirit. As we develop this capacity, something again happens. The realization comes that this is actually as much of my Christ as has been permitted to operate as me. And now that I consciously know it, all of Christ is there. All of Christ is behind this form. This garment on the outside had me confused for a minute. For 50 years, you might say. It had everybody confused. They all thought it was me. And now I'm aware that it's Christ. And that Christ has told me that it is capable of taking me into the kingdom of God. And now I begin to see the possibility more clearly. In fact, I see that the Christ who has done everything up to now is the only self that I have. And if I'm ever going to go to the kingdom, the Christ will be the one who takes me. The Christ has had many way showers, but I'm down to the real thing now. When I meditate, that's just for the simple purpose of releasing the Christ. I'm saying when I meditate, dear Christ, what's on the bill of fare today? Where are we going? What are we doing? What's our motive? What's our purpose here? What's our purpose there? And instead of saying all this, I just get quiet. I don't have to say a word, do I? Of course not. The Christ then says, at least I've got this human trained, and now I can run this life. There's a knotty problem out there. The human wants to do this and he wants to do that. I'll solve it for him. You've got someone within always watching out for you in the without. The real problem is that there comes a point where the human you lifts its head up and says, I've got to do this. I've got to make this decision. This is something for me. No one else can handle it. Christ within stands out there inside looking out while you're making this stand that you're going to do this. The you that isn't is telling the you that is, stand back, I've got to do this. That's your division. And that's your temptation, because there are so many of these things that have to be done by you. You're running the office. You're dictating here and you're dictating there. You don't know that Christ within has been doing a fine job up to a point, up to the point where you meddled. And now it's important for you to see the truth, that the complete path to the kingdom is outlined in total detail. And the going into it will depend on your diminishing, your becoming less and less, and letting Christ do more and more. That's your salvation. And when you realize it, it's kind of a shock, but it's a beautiful thing, because you can now sit back and say, you mean I don't have to puzzle this out? I don't have to waste a lot of energy in this direction? Do nothing? Yes, do nothing as far as decision making, until the decision comes from the Christ, and then you follow through. It's not like you to let someone else decide for you, but it's not like you also to let the real you decide. The you that is you. The you that will be here many tomorrows after this you is gone. You believe that? How deeply have you thought about it? Are you ready for Shaka? You're not going to a kingdom. The kingdom of God is the self of you. Christ in you is the kingdom of God. It's not a place. It's Christ itself. The identity. That identity, being the identity everywhere, is its own kingdom. When you're going to Christ, you're going to the kingdom. And when you've arrived at Christ, even a smidgen, you've arrived at the door of the kingdom. And Christ keeps saying, open the door. Open the door. Knock. Listen. Open the door to Christ. I think Christ is becoming very real, and it's lessening your gravitation to the out of form. As it becomes more and more real, there's more and more joy, because at last you can feel something beyond the human lifespan. The human lifespan is just, we won't say it's nothing, but it's such a tiny bit of living compared to the eternal lifespan. At least the human lifespan enabled you to find Christ. But now that human lifespan seems like such a little thing. Just a fellow running out there and having fun. A woman having this kind of a relationship or that kind of a relationship, taking care of a family. But on the whole, what is she doing when she's taking care of her family? She's worrying about those kids growing up. I just hope I did right by them. Suddenly all of that, we don't have that problem. We have a greater problem. We have to learn that the mother of these children and the father of these children isn't flesh and bones. She and he are without physical structure to limit them to a place and a time. It was necessary. They located themselves, but now that they have grown to a stature that is far larger, they can see that the permanent self is not the outer self. And be grateful for the fact that we got this far. There comes a time in everyone's life when one lifespan or another they reach the realization that my life is not in the outer form. I'm not in the physical world. My life is in this inner Christ. Now, it doesn't matter if you call it Christ. If you want to call it the light, it's better for you. That's better for you for a while. Christ has the implication that this is another person. And if you were in another type of religion, you'd be calling it something else, the Buddhic mind or something of that nature. So the name isn't the point. It's what's there. And this Christ is a designation of what's there. What's there is beyond description. You could write a book with 1,000,000 words and you couldn't cover 1/4 or 1% of it. What's there is infinity. Infinity is the center of your being, and you don't have any concept of what that is. It's so voluminous. It's without any boundaries of any kind. It's beyond energy, beyond time, beyond space. It's beyond anything known. Infinity is the indwelling spirit within each person. No wonder somehow we get things done. With infinity running your life, how can you be more blessed? And who, knowing infinity is running my life, would not yield to infinity? Infinity knows everything to be known in this universe of spirit, and there is no other. Infinity has a way of moving so that 10, 20, 30, 5 million people move through its universe without any form of conflict. When infinity runs their lives, there wouldn't be a war. How could there be? Infinity in this one wouldn't go to war with infinity in that one. So we finally catch on. The modus operandi of the whole universe is far beyond any mind. The only way to live in this universe is to recognize who runs it, and then to yield the extra sense of life, which I have maintained, to that infinite self. Now, I say infinity, but Christ is the infinity, the infinite Christ. And the infinite Christ is running every life that has learned to subdue its own self, to be meek unto the Father. So your strength is your meekness, in your ability to surrender personal motivation, personal action, personal desire, in your ability to surrender that, but to relegate your internal affairs to the force, the infinite force, the infinite Christ. And if we felt sure of that ability to do it, we would do it. But we have to learn how to do it, because we don't know and we can't feel the presence. We can't feel the presence of this force in our lives. If we could, we would. But I just can't feel that there is something running my life. You mean if I don't do it, this force will do it? No, he won't. The force won't do what you want him to do. There must be a you out there with no plan of your own to fulfill. Every time you have a plan, you've immediately shut out the Father. The infinite force isn't waiting for you to make a plan. And your plan isn't going to dovetail with all of the planning of the infinite universe. Your plan will inevitably be out of focus. But when it passes through the scrutiny of the inner self, it will mesh with the other plans that the self has, and that's where the harmony comes from. So now we're, let's say, 20% Christ, 80% me. And then we become 25% Christ, 75% me. Gradually I shorten my own identity and my own fulfillment, realizing the Christ is my fulfillment. And when I become more confident and more confident, then I can at last say, something new has come into my life. I can go to the Spirit of God within me. I can yield my complete purpose to infinite Christ. And because infinite Christ is every being in the universe, I, knowingly yielding to this Christ will teach me what to do in this world. I can be a world savior. I can be anything that the Christ thinks I should be. And maybe my destiny is unknown to me at the present time, but Christ knows where I should go, what I should do. Christ knows if I should be a politician, a millionaire, a rice farmer. I do not have the vaguest notion what will occur when I do these things, but Christ knows. And I'll be in the right place at the right time for the right thing, to do something in the grand spiritual plan. Then we get the confidence. I think I can do this. I think I can live it all, 100%. Well, 95%. There's got to be a little leeway for me. So, Father, you have 95% of my life. I just need a little leeway. And the Father will run your life. Anyone who wants the Father to run his life can do it. It's a matter of overcoming personal sense. Personal sense which says, I want this and I want that. It all sounds easy when you hear it, and that's the way it is, but then you go out to do it, and your emotions get in the way. Your desires get in the way. Your opportunities that may fleet if you don't grab them, they get in the way. All the things that tend to distract us from the inner path, the one goal of following out the orders of the Christ. I'm going to assume that 90% of us are dedicated to this inner self. That the orders of the Christ are what we seek. And I think we have an uncertainty about how we're going to secure these orders. What do we do? Say, teach me, show me? We don't get an answer. It doesn't work that way. Once you start listening to what God has in mind, there is a series of echelons. There are outer ones and deeper ones and higher ones and lower ones. And you start obeying just the simple ones. You start talking to the neighbor, and you talk and you chat. You're chatting about the weather. But in the back of your mind is the thought that God infinite and God infinite are having a conversation. It's my mouth and his mouth. But God infinite is the reality. There's only one God infinite between us. That is what we become aware of. And when we exchange empty thoughts about something, or maybe some important thoughts, we're aware that our conversation is never done between me and some other person without the infinite one being present. We are never alone. Never. And then when we begin to temper what we are saying out here, we may find that a certain word, a certain thought doesn't quite feel right to us. And that's because we're beginning to feel the presence entering our thought in a certain way. We start to say, why don't you do that and report back to me after you've seen him, and the presence is saying something a little different to you. And then you begin to say, well, by second thought, why don't you do it this way? That little change in your itinerary for someone else was given to you by the presence when you were talking but listening. And then what you were flying off and saying do is tempered by what the presence says, do it this way. And the fellow comes to you one day and says, thank you for that advice you gave me. It worked out fine. You'll always recognize when the Spirit is getting inside your thought. It's because you have permitted it to. You've opened out a way. And now it's just not thought, it's action. It's growth, it's life. After a while, more and more of this life is running your life. you find you're a blessing to more people, because everything you do is under the tutelage of God, is sends you forth to bless the world. I'd like to see this awareness begin. I'd like to see the thing come to a surface. I'd like to see more and more of us living within, and yet we do all the things on the outside that we'd still do, but we do them under direction, willingly. We don't go out to we find everything we have in mind is tempered by the fact that Spirit does not object. Spirit says, yes, this is good. We slowly find our lives cleaning up. We don't make the same mistakes. We don't suddenly find ourselves in some kind of a relationship that is wrong. Many of us do find ourselves in those kind of relationships. The fellows at the office had this plan and I joined them. Turned out not good. The girls' club has this plan, but we could be doing another plan which would be more beneficial, and everything is so subtle. Finally, when we're all on this kind of machinery that runs automatically, we find that our lives take a fluid motion. Pretty soon we know we're on level ground. And then we find that Spirit had in mind a lot more than we ever dreamed. We become leaders in our way, and yet we're not leading, Spirit is. Many of us have felt what I'm speaking of in our lives now. Many of us have been aware of the Spirit running our lives. Now we'd like intensification and more people aware of the Spirit. We'd like to see more of the Spirit in evidence, visibly. It is a spiritual universe. It is not a material universe. And the matter has to learn to give way to the Spirit. Maybe the world has to be born again. Using the word I to signify the Spirit of God as your identity, stretching the word to include the fullness of your identity as the infinite Father. The I of you is the kingdom of God. The fullness of the I. It is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Means it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the fullness of I. Of the I that is one with the Father. And there's nothing else the Father can do, because everywhere, everyone in reality is the Father. You see, the Father has been running the Father's universe. But we have all lived in the illusion and said, where's the Father? We would send our boys off to war. Some of them came back. We said, where's the father? That wasn't in God's universe that they went. It wasn't in God's universe that Kennedy was assassinated. It's not in God's universe that anybody drops an atom bomb. It's amazing how completely man has missed reality, all by missing his identity, not knowing that I am the Christ of God. He's gone out, he's worn a coat of skin, and he said, look at me, I am somebody. I can do this, I can do that. And then 20 years later, he's coughing up a storm. The clock says it's time to recess. I guess we'll have to. I'd like to say something first, though, if I may. I have greatly enjoyed this seminar because I feel that the consciousness is a little extraordinary, and it's a pleasure to enjoy that consciousness. And I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart to every one of you. I will not have time. We'll all be running for the door later, and I want to say thank you now. Please. Thank you. We'll see you after 10 minutes. I would like to get a few things straight to be sure that we have them in mind and know them. That when a form dies, as they say, the life in the form, which was Christ when it was alive, is still a life when the form goes by. So that the form is shown to be not the life. The form simply goes out of existence and the life continues. And I would like to be sure that that is understood by every person. That your form will go someday, but the Christ of your form remains alive because Christ cannot die. And when you designate yourself to be the form, you're mistaken. You are not the form. Call no man your father, because your father was the father of that form. But you are the Christ. Call no man your father, for your father is the Father. And that clarifies the statement. It also clarifies for us why we can never die. The only way you can die is to think that you are the form. And you're just not. The Christ is the form, and the Christ is the identity, and the outer form is something that passes away. So when you get rooted in the knowledge that you are the Christ, you've got your real identity. And it doesn't matter whether you believe in the Christ or not, you're still the Christ. Your identity is what it is. And you can be a heathen or whatever you want to be. You're still the Christ. And if we are sold on that concept the knowledge that we are the one invisible reality, and then are further educated to realize that the Christ of you and the Christ of John and the Christ of Mary are still one Christ, even though you seem to be three forms. If you could see the invisible, you would see this Christ all over the universe as an inseparable substance. The one invisible Christ. And that's the miracle worker. And when we live in the knowledge that we are the one inseparable Christ wearing an outer form that will perish, that's accurate. And the outer form that we wear is our concept of the Christ. We do not have the capacity to form the accurate truth. We have the human mind. And the human mind is capable of just so much depth in its perception. There will come a day that Christ will open your perception. So just realize that I and the Father are one. The Father is the identity, and the Son is the Christ. That's who the world is composed of. There's nothing else in the world. There is the Father and the Father's Son, which is Christ, infinite. And that's the world. That's the universe. That's the real universe. But that is a starting base. There's no reason for any of us to lose control, because when we realize that is the truth, we begin to relegate decisions in our life to the inner Christ. When Jesus was about to depart the world, after having returned to it, no, this was before he returned to it. This was before he left, yes. He said something about, I've got to go now, and I expect you fellas to go with me and all that. But there's one of you going to stay home. Peter got indignant. Why was John being favored? So Peter got a little uppity with the master. He wanted to know. He demanded almost. And Jesus said to him, well, if I will that John stays here, that's all there is to it. I don't have to give you a reason. And that was at the end of the Gospel of John. And of course the reason for his being here is the truth message had to be on earth, and it had to be deposited with an individual who knew the truth message. There was a further indication of the fact that he knew at the time that there would be communication between the Christ of Jesus and the Christ of John on earth from the Christ of Jesus not on earth. And then, of course, the revelation was issued, so that there was a permanent record buried in nicely by the organized church of the ways of the kingdom the way of the Lord, the way of truth, the hypnosis of man. The complete revelation was entrusted to John, but it is not generally known that John went through what you and I are going through. John went through being born into the Christ. He went through everything that Jesus went through. That's why when John remained on earth, he became such a light wherever he went, and why stories persist about his healing capacities and what he had done. John had found that he was not worshiping Jesus. He had discovered that the Christ in him was the same as the Christ in Jesus. And it was that knowledge that enabled him to find himself, to find that individuality which the inner Christ gives to a man. You may say, I'm the same as him then, if we all have the one self inside, but that isn't true. The infinite individuality given to each individual by the Christ is the only thing that makes for harmony in the universe. Each is given an assignment in some way that does not conflict with the assignment of another. It's like the pie is cut up, and when the pie is distributed, each gets a different piece, but they all fit back together into the one pie. The infinite Christ working the magic of the divine gives each of us an opportunity to live to the full. I mean, you cannot estimate what our capacity is. If we say it's infinite, we're accurate, but we must realize that it takes a long time for infinity to live itself. And that's why we're given everlasting life. In that everlasting life, there will be no repetition of our experience. It will go on and on and on and on. And it will never duplicate what we have done, because infinity is the law of being. When we were originally given the choice of a human life that dies or a divine life that cannot die, we didn't know we were given the choice, because we had been born, we thought. But when you discover that birth, the actual birth that occurred in our lives, was the beginning of an experience that was all illusion. And to negate it now, to grow out of it, makes possible the movement into the next level of our infinite life. The fifth world is going to be that. It's so big that you can't do it all at once. Our souls have to be trained And of course, we have trained our souls in this world so that at the time of the transition from this world to the fifth world, it will be our souls that make the transition for us. We have to learn, therefore, what our soul can do. The things your eye can't see, your soul can see. The things you can't feel, your soul can feel. Your soul begins on a completely new level of perception. What your five senses are trying to do are all done by your soul. Your soul begins to interact you find that your soul is infinite too. Everything is infinite from this point of the fifth world on. But your soul has to train you. You have to learn the ways of spirit. And you may seem like a little child again. But all this is necessary for the retraining period. What seems like a little child in the fifth world of soul would seem like a grandfather's grandfather in this world. We have so much ahead of us now as we move into a world where there is no time. No time, no space, not even energy, no matter, none of the things that we have been used to in this world, and only the Spirit of God in you can navigate in that universe. It's a totally new experience. And to some it comes at a time when they didn't know what was next. And even though you still don't know, you can release yourself to it with the assurance that when you enter that realm, you have passed all the tests you have to pass. Your initiation is complete. And that's why we're in this fourth world now. This is a sort of preliminary initiation. We're learning how to trust, how to drop off fear, how to drop all desire for self-protection, how to know that the invisible will always protect me. We don't know it quite, but we're finding it out. I'd like to read a couple of things that were on my list for yesterday that we didn't have time for. Well, the first one that hits me is probably the last. I was never born. Call no man your father. No person, no material being gave birth to me. Therefore, I was never born. And because there was no birth, but the appearance of a birth, there will be no death. There may be the appearance of a death. I was never born. I will never die. That is what I want you to know for certainty. It doesn't matter where you are, where this form has remembrance, whether this form is gone with the wind. You were not born because Christ was not born. Christ is called the only begotten Son. And that Son of God, this infinite Son of God, over the entire spiritual universe, one Son, is the only being that we are responsible to. And as we become more and more responsible to that being, we discover that being we are. Now, you don't feel like the infinite Son, but you are. You don't feel like God's only Son, but you are. Just remove the coat of flesh. And when the Spirit comes through with what is called spiritual flesh, and you awaken to discover, I am the Son of God, the only Son God has. There are 50 of us, 5 million of us, 5 billion of us. I am the one who is the self of God. One infinite self. It's quite a responsibility and a fact and a truth, something to live with and know. As big as it may be, it's you. And none of it is in the flesh, all of it is in the Spirit. One day now, the Christ within you will be in flames. There won't be flames that you're acquainted with. The flame of Christ is quite different. And in that flame, you will be baptized. You'll be baptized as the Christ. You'll understand what happened in the early Bible when the three were put in the fire. And the man who put them in the fire was approached by a potentate who said, I thought you threw those 3 men in the fire. What's that fourth one doing there? The fourth one was the reality of their being. The flame of Christ is a perpetual flame. When that baptism comes to you, then you will discover that you are Christ. You may conjecture, you may approach it, you may feel, well, maybe I am, maybe I'm not, or I'm sure I am, but I haven't received the evidence of it. The flame of Christ will baptize you almost as if to say, now do you know you are the Christ? Because the flame will not burn. We all have that to look forward to, and yet it's already been done. When you receive the recognition of it, that will confirm what has been done. Things to work on now in order to remove all barriers to your further learning of the truth. Don't let time puzzle you. It must be understood. It must be solved. it has a way of puzzling. It says you were born at this date, and the statistics say I'm going to die at that date. That's time. If you could look at it and say, well, I wasn't born at this date at all. That was the concept of me, born at that date. I'm not going to die at this date either, because there's no time in eternity. If you can solve the tricks of time, the deceptions of time, if you take them apart, if you spend the time, let's say, one time a week or one time a month if necessary, working with time, puzzling it out, letting it tell you why it says God is the same today, tomorrow, and yesterday. Some of the Greeks had the knowledge of time. Plato had. Some of them had the understanding of the illusion. Plato had. There have been men in this world who knew truth. There have had to be such men in various parts of the universe to keep truth alive. And now you become one of those individuals. Maybe in the 50th century, they'll be looking back and they'll be saying, what about your name? She knew truth, or he knew truth. And it will be, because as you develop now and become a beacon for others, you have the Christ knowledge to give to them, to teach them how to be free of all the things that the world is struggling with today. And maybe we can end this seminar with a little teaching on how to handle situations when they appear to be out of control, whether they're group situations or personal body situations or personal emotional situations. If we have a ready plan to at least look at them in a different way, with a knowledge of their unreality in Christ, it will help. So if this is child's play for some of you, or if it's new to some of you, I would like to apologize in advance, because I want everyone to know what to do. And let's take a more difficult case, not just a head cold or a mistaken, I go down the wrong street or anything like that. Let's take something specific that happens to an individual. Let's say that individual is what we call unable to function correctly. Something is wrong in the mental system, and the person is disoriented. And your problem is, what can I do to this person who's disoriented? Now, you have several ways of going about it. And we'll take the infinite way method of seeing that the disorientation is not in the Christ of the individual. So you know that basically the individual is the Christ, but the disorientation is in a different level of a human being who is momentarily disoriented. Now, you've got to recognize the identity of the Christ as the identity of the individual before you start your healing. Because that's standard. you've got to recognize everyone as the Christ anyway. So we make it a point that when this individual comes to you or is known to you and has this mental aberration of some sort, you're not fooled by it. The condition may be a threat to a lot of people, but not to you. It can't be. You are aware that this individual, apparently in a mental state, this individual is the Christ. Now that's true, without knowing who it is, or when it happens, or what happens. Every individual is the Christ. Now, as you stand in the knowledge of the Christhood of that individual, and you stand in the knowledge that I am the Christ, not because I'm borrowing this idea, or I'm suddenly aware of it, or I'm suddenly using it, because I have proved myself to be the Christ. I have lived inside myself as the Christ. The more you live it, the more you'll find the effect on the person. Now then, as you live the Christ, whoever comes to you is automatically the Christ. No one approaches you ever who is not the Christ. Ever. There's no exception. Now then, your Christhood, you can reach it quicker when you meditate, because that's when your thoughts are out of the way. You're in the vacuum of thought when you meditate, and therefore your Christhood, your light, is more available. It's not buried deep in years and years of disuse, where the human couldn't reach it. So you're the Christ, and you know your identity, and that's all you do. You don't worry about whether or not this person appears sick or what she is sick of. You're not even concerned about the name of it. You just know that you're the Christ, and that's it. You let the Christ handle it. Is that clear? You don't do it. You've got to be able to reach the inner Christ of your being. So let's get into the inner Christ. And you know, if you start a meditation, the first meditation doesn't make you able to handle somebody. It takes a few and maybe years and years of doing it, but you get the flow running, and you can quickly locate a depth of yourself that isn't a normal daily depth. We'll say it's the Christ depth. And now this individual comes to you in the problem area of her mind, and your job is simple. You don't say to her, do this, do that. You're not even concerned what she does. You tell her to be still, give her something to read or whatever. If she's on the phone, tell her to be quiet. Tell her to just relax. And you go to yourself and you take who you are and you meditate instantly, and then you're finding the Christ when you meditate. She is the Christ. You relate these two. The Christ there and the Christ here, myself, are one. You don't even question what she has or what she doesn't have. You don't offer any help in those lines. You just get into meditation and know the Christ of her and the Christ of you are one, and rest until in your meditation something says to you, it is done, or you feel it done, you feel a jolt maybe. Something communicates which says it is done. And sometimes you just rest there and rest there and rest, and nothing communicates. Well, you stay there a while and come back to it later. But the point is you're getting inside. But when you're inside, you're not just inside yourself, you're inside her, because she is the one you're working for, and the two are one, and when two are gathered in my name, which is Christ, there's the solution. It's automatic. Later she's apt to say to you, I feel a little better, or say that was wonderful, or something of that nature, or continue, I don't feel any better. And you try it again the next day, maybe 4 times in one day if necessary. Now, please handle anything in your life that way. Anything. Because once you get the habit of putting the two together, the Christ of me, and I'm automatically in the Christ when I meditate. And if I'm not, I better do something about that. Get that working. And you don't be concerned about whether she had a leg this or an arm that or a hip that or a shoulder this. It's none of your concern. Your job is to just know that she's the Christ. That is all. And now you know that you're the Christ automatically, and you get into that Christ. You're dealing below the level of human minds, or above the level of human minds. You don't have to do anything. Just remain in Christ. Never forget that she's in Christ. You've got to know two Christs are on hand as one Christ. And that makes you a hero, but 10 years makes it better, and 15 years makes it better than that, and so on. Because then you're able to broaden out, leave less of the human beliefs behind, less of the karmic beliefs behind. The point is, that's how you handle things, and I would like everyone to know how to handle things. I don't know if there's someone in the next room who's robbing the place. Well, all right, get on the phone if you want to, call the police, fine. But no, Christ is in the next room, and I am in this, Christ in this room, they are one. Know that, and call the police too, but know the truth, always. If the race riot in your town, know this, everyone is the Christ. Every single person. The man beaten up, the 5 fellows or 4 who beat him, they're all the Christ. I'm not joking, I'm knowing they're the Christ. Because I go into the silence. You don't know what it'll do, but it'll do some great good. Handle every situation that way. Your son is doing this. He's the Christ. I'm the Christ. Meditate. Not to help him, not to get him over this hump or that hump, just to know he's the Christ. Let Christ get him over the hump. But you get into Christ. You see, the healing is all Christ, and you get to Christ. So I think that's clear, and I think it's definitely the way that you'll find many things that you couldn't handle before come easily, and you understand why they're working. You're getting the laws of spirit in motion. You're living in God's universe, not in this man-made universe. And you're starting to put spiritual law in operation. Well, that's off my mind, and I wanted to get it off my mind because this is a wonderful class, and I'd like everyone in the class to know how to free themselves from many of the things that we have that stick in our minds, that just come from nowhere, and suddenly I got this on my body, and I got that on my body, I got this situation. Well, yeah, all of that stuff is in the world mind, and your mind just picks it up like a TV screen. But you'll free yourself of all of this. And then before before you hear from somebody, you'd be well to, every day, free yourself from world mind. If that's all you're ever attacked by is the world mind. That's the only thing reporting something wrong. Whereas if you get into the quietness and find the spiritual level of your being, certainly, positively have it, you rest in it, you don't have to worry about clearing your mind. The Christ will take care of it. You have released Christ into your life, and whatever is necessary will automatically happen. These are some of the automatic things that you do. You'd be surprised how much is taken in by us without our even knowing it. And then it grows in us, and before you know it, we have a belief. And it may be true or not, but we don't know it. And then our mind tells us that's what we believe. We have to believe what our mind tells us. And it's completely untrue. Our mind told us we were born. It's completely untrue. You have a mind that has lied to you. And you know it's not just about one thing. It's lied to you and telling you you are a human being. It's lied to you about so many things that can't be true because God says they're not true. So you want to get straight with yourself. You want to find out what I really am, what I really believe, what I really know. Did the things that my mind said happen? Well, you think they did, because your access to what happened is through your mind. Your mind identifies the things you saw. And along comes someone who saw something else. He believes that what he saw is true. You believe what you saw is true. And I know that one of you is wrong. But it would never occur to you that both of you are wrong. Nobody is dead in this universe, but do you think anyone ever killed someone if nobody is dead? Who killed a man? Has there ever been a murder? There has been on the level of human thought. This one is dead and this one murdered him. Now, they try this one then in the court, sentence him for killing that one. But suppose that one didn't die and isn't dead. You're sentencing a man for killing when the man he killed is alive. Well, there's no way to puzzle it out and make sense out of it. There's one universe of Christ, and then there's that make-believe universe we call the human world. It all becomes manageable by the Christ, but not by another human. And when you try to be a human, you find you will have to get into the same boat and ride with the same rules that other humans ride by. And they ride by this is good and that's evil. When you're in the Christhood, all you can see internationally is God's work being done. We're going to quiet ourselves and find the center. I can share whatever I know with an individual who's ready, who's been prepared to listen. And you can share, too, with people who are ready to listen. You find, though, that people aren't quite as prepared as you'd like to think. You'll think, well, I'll tell her. I'll let her know. And you do. But it perplexes her. She can't figure it out. You tell her, well, there's no time in reality. It won't sit very well if she's a certain person. You tell her there are no things wrong in the universe, it's just that we think so. That won't make headway. And if he happens to be a minister, a good, stalwart citizen, and you ask him why God permits all these terrible things to happen, he'll give you some stock answer. But we can't question the Lord and that sort of thing. So your truth is handled very discriminately. You bring a person into a place where they can find truth for themselves. It's better than telling the truth. And the reason for our meditation now is to let us all try to reach some inner conclusions. And one is that I want to find this invisible self that is going to run my life from here on into infinity. I know it exists. I want it. I want it to know that I want it. When it announces itself to me, and I hear or find some evidence that this self is a living self beyond the reach of all the impurities of the world, and I know that it is myself, and I know that it is his self, and it is her self, and every self. It is the one self of all. Then I can resign my life to it. And I want to find the inner conviction to resign my life to this invisible self. Some call it the Christ. Some call it the light. There are many names for it, but none has ever found that they can lay hands upon it. It exists only in the invisible, but it moves the universe. That self is myself. I'm ready to give myself to that self. I want conviction. I want knowledge. I want the assurance. I don't know how that assurance will come, but I want it.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning into our channel. If you're enjoying the content, don't forget to hit that like button below. It really helps us out. And why not share this video with your friends? Spread the word and help us reach more people. Lastly, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notifications so you never miss a new video from us. Thanks for watching and see you next time.